So I've been thinking about this man-bear thing, but what about a man in a bear? I'm Micah, a licensed therapist, and here we like to talk about horror. Midsommar is a folk horror story where some young American adults go to immerse themselves in the culture related to this special ceremony, mostly for research and funsies, but it doesn't end up being so fun. I've heard this is a lot like Wicker Man, but I've never seen Wicker Man, so you're just gonna have to tell me. When we meet our main character, Dani, she's leaving a voicemail for her sister, Terry. Terry had previously sent a very concerning email that was suicidal in nature and threatening to their parents. Like many times during uncertainty and stress, Dani decides to turn to her partner, Christian. This whole movie is a breakup situation, and Christian is terrible. But I do want to add that very rarely in toxic situations or in poor relationships is one person solely to blame. Even if someone is awful, the other person often decides to tolerate it for one reason or another. Sometimes it's complicated, no judgment. Dani doesn't have great boundaries and is quite passive, but she really didn't deserve any of this crap. So she calls her boyfriend, who reports that he has recently smoked some resin and has ordered some pizza and doesn't have time for her. At this point in the story, we don't know Dani. We don't know if she actually has been very emotionally abusive and kind of crying wolf. So she tells Christian she's emailed 3 times with no response and proceeds to say she does this every other day because you let her. You go into crisis mode and respond to this ploy for attention. At this point, this could be true. We don't know. He's not being very compassionate and understanding regardless, but under certain circumstances, I could see somebody being like, come on. All right, we've been through this. The problem is that you never know with someone who's dealing with a mental health crisis what point they're at, even if you're getting very frustrated and they are repeatedly saying things that are very concerning, but it's not turning into anything. It could still turn into something. So this is a tricky situation. During this conversation, he seems like he's trying to work up the nerve to say something. Like that's kind of his nonverbal body language. Dani's definitely got some serious anxiety going on. But this makes me wonder about her family and relationship with them. This isn't something that we learn about in the movie, but Dani and Terry, her sister, very clearly have some stuff going on. I'm not sure what's happened in their family. Then we see on the opposite end of the call that Christian's interactions with his friends are indicating that he's really not feeling it with Dani anymore. They even make statements about her needing a therapist and how she needs to call her therapist. One of them states, this is literally abuse. She's literally abusing you. Which, the only part of this story I'm probably going to defend Christian at all. We don't know that that's not true at this point. Still, Christian's not feeling it. He needs to go ahead and wrap things up. But if you're sticking with somebody and you're not feeling it and you're just dragging them along, you're actually going to hurt them a whole lot more in the long run. So it's better to just rip the band-aid off. But we learned that Christian is very self-focused. Up to this point, therapist brain could see things going either way. Sometimes people really are emotionally abusive. Definitely not saying that's the situation in this story, but it does happen. This is where we see that this situation was much more serious than it was presented. Dani calls back Christian wailing. We cut to a scene of firefighters suited up entering a home where we learn there has been a murder-suicide by carbon monoxide. Dani's sister has killed herself and taken her parents with her. So it's pretty horrific. I remember the first time that I watched this movie, I was like, oh shit. Then we see Dani in the throes of grief. In comparison to something like Hereditary, also created by Ari. I think it's Ari. We're going to go with Ari. His movies sometimes have very explicit, intense representations of grief and loss, which I can kind of appreciate. I think sometimes in movies we get desensitized to death that we kind of lose focus of what that experience is like in reality. So we move forward in time, and Dani is at a party with Christian and his friends, and you can just see that she's lost in grief, that she is still in that space and is just trying to go through the motions to just get on with life and probably make Christian happy. This is where we learn about Midsommar. Dani didn't know that there was this trip planned with Christian and his friends. Christian then reveals to Dani that we're leaving in 2 weeks. And Dani is like, thanks for letting me know. Christian very quickly is trying to backpedal and get around this, manipulate Dani, and is saying, I told you I wanted to go. She's just like, yeah, but I didn't know you were actually going. And he's like, oh, I just decided it today. I wasn't keeping it from you. He apologizes. He says, I'm sorry. And then she says, I don't need an apology. I got confused. So then he invites her without talking to his friends. So here he goes, just showing his nature to anybody that's in a relationship with him, apparently. He's like, she accepted, but she's not actually coming. So he's trying to play both sides here with his friends who have heard not great things about Dani. And then Dani on the other side being like, what the hell's going on? His friends are basically like, what the fuck? I feel like Christian hasn't had a lot of boundaries upheld around him. So there's this friend, he's from this small community that celebrates Midsommar. He seemed creepy to me. From the very beginning, I was like, this guy's weird, I don't know about him. So they learn about winter and summer solstice, and Midsommar being the celebration of summer solstice. Dani learns about the competition to select the May Queen. I recognize that Dani is having these moments where she is being thrust back into her grief, which is very realistic when you've had significant loss. Kind of comes and goes in waves, and then in between the immense pain, you're just kind of floating through life existing. So the trip begins. We see some shifting of the cameras, kind of upside down views, which generally a movie seems to indicate they're like, we're going somewhere else, we're shifting into another part of the story, another part of reality. They end up driving 4 hours to a field, then they just start tripping on mushrooms. All right, you do you. Dani's not feeling trying the mushrooms at first, and Christian decides to pressure her until she does it. She gives in. So they're sitting in the bright sun, tripping at 9 p.m., which has got to be kind of like, what's going on here? And one of the people says, this feels wrong. I don't like that. And then a new person walks up and he's like, oh no, a new person. If you've ever been around anybody who's tripping, like, pretty accurate. So Dani is hallucinating, seeing like energy coming up through the earth in the form of grass. She sees grass like growing in her hand, and her hallucination, like the textures are just blending together. Looks like the trees are breathing, and she panics, jumps up, and is like, I'm going for a walk. She goes, runs out in the woods, and starts dreaming, and she's dreaming about the recent loss in her life. So it was only dark for a couple hours during this time. Midsummer's to celebrate the time of year when it is daylight like all the time. To get dark for a couple hours and then right back to daylight. So she's found and she passed out in the woods. Then they get up, get their shit together, and decide to continue hiking deeper into the woods, away from the cars. No, thank you. I need to be near a car. So they get there, and there's these girls that are dressed in all white that take all of their stuff. No, thank you. Don't take my things. I need those things. They're greeted with someone saying, welcome home. Then there's other tourists. The one thing I noticed in this part is that everybody is very pale, and that there's too much sun for all that. Like, as a fellow pale person, I can say that's just like a horrible sunburn waiting to happen, man. So they drink some more hallucinogenic substances, which you will see that's kind of just a thing that happens throughout this entire movie. This is where we meet a little redheaded girl who takes an interest in Christian. This becomes relevant as the story moves forward. There's a lot of ritualistic behavior, strange, sharp breathing that the people do for some reason. Then Christian forgets Dani's birthday. And then Dani proceeds to go and talk to other people about this and says, I forgot to remind him. Or Dani, honey. So she doesn't say anything to him about it because she's just kind of like, well, it's my fault. I didn't remind him it was my birthday. They're shown around. They go to the sacred temple and look around it, but no one's allowed in there. And while they're walking, they see this giant bear in a cage. And the one dude's just like, are we just ignoring the bear? And then Christian's like, it's a bear. Yeah, dude, it's a bear. What's your problem? They learn through some old drawings and depictions of various ceremonies that there's a pubic hair curse. And they learn that they sleep in a huge barn thing, all in one big group, kinda. We then start to learn more about this culture. Your role in life in this community is dictated by the age group that you're in. Once you get to certain ages, your role changes. So Christian ends up bringing Dani out to the side somewhere because somebody let him know that it was her birthday, and he's like, oh crap. So he gives her this half-ass birthday cake and a candle that won't light. And ends up lying. It's like, forgive me, which she accepts. Later, the ceremonies continue, and you'll see a number of things like this. These women were picking flowers and walking backwards. So you see that a few times. Then there's this older lady and this older man that walk up. There's these tables set up, long tables for everyone to sit at and eat and hang out in the bright daylight. You know something's up when these older people walk up because, like, everybody's, like, real serious. They have a ceremony, and the older people are carried off in a chair and start to feel the tension. So the older lady and gentleman are taken to the top of a mountain, and this is where things get even weirder. Dani can tell something's wrong. She's like, nah, this is weird. Everybody's watching down below the mountain, and the older lady jumps off the mountain and hits the ground pretty hard. Very graphic. She's definitely dead. Now the other tourists that are there are freaking out, rightfully so. They're like, oh my god. It seems to have activated her sympathetic nervous system, and her nervous system has chosen to freeze. So the old man jumps. He hits the ground. and doesn't die. So he's making horrible sounds, and everybody starts making horrible moaning sounds. It's almost like they're trying to experience the emotion with the person, and then someone walks up with a mallet and just puts him out of his misery. And then all of the people involved in the ceremony then take the mallet, and each one just takes a good swing at him. Yeah, so it's pretty rough. It's explained later that they all do it instead of dying in shame, which corrupts the spirit. Learn that the older people, once they hit 72, decide that they're going to jump off a mountain. So here's Dani having witnessed a suicide after having serious trauma related to suicide. Everybody's under the influence of psychedelic substances, and Dani is here in the throes of grief and traumatic loss. This is a disaster waiting to happen, and she is very vulnerable. So I started wondering about the sun and the disruption to your circadian rhythm that might occur with it being daylight like all the time. But I don't know. Christian has decided to collaborate with his friend who has traveled there to do his thesis on Midsommar and the people celebrating the ceremony, and Christian's just like, nah, I'm gonna do it too. So Christian's terrible across the board. So Pele, the weird guy from the beginning who's originally from this community, decides to try to calm Dani down. Dani's freaking out, of course, at this point. It's like, I need to leave. I don't know why I'm here. And he's real weird and asks her if she feels held by Christian. I'm just getting like high control cultish vibes. I'm not a fan. Then the corpses of the elderly people are burned. They're cremated. Everybody watches. Seems intense. But humans do that stuff. I mean, we used to go and watch hangings. So Dani is trying to express her concern to Christian, and Christian's like, I know it's really shocking, but keep an open mind. We stick our elders in nursing homes. I'm sure they find that disturbing. Which is true. I mean, cultural norms matter, but it's still a lot. So Dani proceeds to have a dream about him abandoning her, and her dead family is involved in it, and it's like... So then we have the redheaded girl reemerging, trying to win Christian over, and she proceeds to do the little spell with the pubic hair curse that we encountered in the beginning. So people start disappearing, the tourist people start disappearing, and everybody's just kind of like, I don't know, they left. They'll come back for you. Christian doesn't seem to give a crap and proceeds to ask the people about their breeding processes. They then learn about Reuben, who is a disfigured individual. They learn that he was intentionally inbred to keep his cognition unclouded. Alright. You think that Reuben might have a bigger role than he does, but like I'm pretty sure you don't see him again after this. So it's kind of like, alright, what are we doing here? Kind of gets you a little deeper into the mindset of the group of being very closed off to other civilizations and having completely different rules for everything, including reproduction. Again, you know, all of the people who've come are just dying in various ways. Dani and Christian don't know about it yet, but they end up being the last two left. Dani participates in the May Queen ceremony and is named the May Queen because she's the last one standing. So then there's a really weird sex scene. Christian is drugged and encouraged to be part of their breeding program. No kink shaming, but this one's weird. Made me uncomfortable. Definitely like, ooh, I hope nobody walks in the room while I'm watching this part. So yeah, just like any other situation where there's a lot of emotion, everybody in the situation is sympathizing with emotional verbal expression. So basically they're whatever sounds the redheaded girl is making, they are imitating, and it's real creepy. So Dani sneaks up, peeks through, sees what's happening, and is very understandably devastated. Proceeds to be very upset, wailing, and is, again, the villagers that are with her are kind of embarking on this emotion with her, and that is also super creepy. So Dani, facing all of this emotion, is, as the May Queen, is then chosen to select who would be the 9th person that will die in the temple, because we learned that apparently all of the people who died were sacrifices, and that sometimes they sacrificed their own people, obviously, but they needed 9 people, and Christian is paralyzed with some sort of substance, and is wheeled out there, and she decides to choose him, that he's going to burn up in the fire, because she's like, fuck you. They proceed to put him inside of the bear body, which they apparently killed at some point. They just put him in there, and he's just like alive, but like the whole time. The movie ends with a dramatic burning of the temple and Dani getting her retribution. So this movie is basically an extreme breakup scenario. Got a little bored. Definitely didn't want to sit through some of the long, prolonged stuff. It could have definitely been a shorter movie. Ultimately, it's a little fucked. And I think that this movie plays on our fears of what we don't understand when it comes to other cultures. And then it kind of confuses us. And then the horror happens. I really wonder about Dani's childhood and what was up with her sister. Like, I want to know what is going on with this family. My therapist's brain is like, we could have prevented all of this. Moral of the story, Christian sucks. Don't date him. Don't be Christian because he sucks. Know your friends and avoid them if they suck, because they're just going to bring you down with them. You're going to end up skinned and your corpse burning in a temple. I mean, you might. If you think someone is being avoidant and crappy, they probably are. Make sure you go with somebody who's going to appreciate you for who you are. Don't lead people along. If you don't like somebody, break up with them. Movie's alright. I thought that the atmosphere was interesting, unnecessarily long, but I think that the suspense and the emotional buildup was a reason for the long, boring moments. It feels like this movie is trying to be intellectual. It's that elevated horror thing, which I can get behind, but I also don't think it's a masterpiece. And that it wasn't particularly clever in any way. Ultimately, Dani is essentially alone. Maybe not so much physically, but she's lost her family, and emotionally, ain't nobody there supporting her. When someone is alone, they are very easily influenced by the environment around them. And I guess if you can't beat them, join them.